The auction block stood in the center of the dusty square like a rotting tooth, weathered wood, sun-bleached, stained with decades of shame. Around it, men in sweat-ringed hats shuffled their boots, spat tobacco, and pretended they weren't participating in something that made their wives turn away. September heat pressed down on the town of Bitter Creek like a hand over a mouth. On the platform, a girl stood with her wrists bound loosely in front of her, not tight enough to bruise, but tight enough to make a point. She couldn't have been more than 14. Her dress was gray cotton, patched at the elbows, torn at the hem. Her hair hung in dark, tangled strings across her face. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked at the ground, at her bare feet, at the space between the planks where dirt had gathered. "Lot 17, the auctioneer called out, his voice flat, mechanical. He'd done this before, too many times. Orphan girl, no family, no known kin. Suitable for housework, cooking, mending, $12 to start." "Silence." The girl's lips moved, barely a whisper. "They passed me by." "No one bid." The auctioneer cleared his throat. $12, anyone. A man in the back coughed. Another adjusted his hat. A woman holding a basket turned and walked away, her skirts kicking up dust. $11 then. Come on, folks. She's young, strong enough. Still nothing. The girl's shoulders curled inward, like she was trying to fold herself smaller, trying to disappear. Her voice came again, softer this time, almost lost beneath the wind. "They always pass me by." The auctioneer's patience thinned. $10, final call, $10 and she's yours. The crowd shifted. A few men exchanged glances. One shook his head and turned to leave. Then, from the far edge of the square, a voice cut through the silence. "Mine." Heads turned. A man stood at the back of the crowd, half in shadow beneath the awning of the general store. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a weathered face and a hat pulled low. His clothes were plain, work shirt, worn trousers, boots caked in trail dust. He didn't look like a man with money to waste. He didn't look like a man who attended auctions. But his hand was raised. The auctioneer blinked. "Sir." "I said mine." The man stepped forward, moving through the crowd with slow, deliberate steps. His voice was low, rough, like gravel scraping stone. "I'll take her." The girl's head lifted, just slightly. Her eyes, wide, dark, full of something between fear and disbelief, locked onto him. The auctioneer recovered quickly, nodding. $10 then, sold to. 20, the man interrupted. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer frowned. "Sir, the bid was 10. 20, the man repeated. He reached into his coat and pulled out a worn leather pouch, dropping it onto the platform with a heavy thud. Coins spilled out, glinting in the sun. "Count it if you want, but she's mine, now." The auctioneer stared at the pouch, then at the man, then back at the coins. He picked up the pouch, weighed it in his hand, and nodded slowly. "Sold, lot 17 to the gentleman." The man didn't move. He stood at the edge of the platform, his gaze fixed on the girl. She stared back, her bound wrists trembling. "Cut the rope," he said. The auctioneer hesitated. "Sir, that's not." "Cut the rope." There was something in his voice, not anger, not threat, but something harder, something immovable. The auctioneer pulled a knife from his belt and sliced through the thin cord. The girl's hands dropped to her sides. She rubbed her wrists, her eyes never leaving the stranger's face. He stepped onto the platform and held out his hand. "Come on." She didn't take it, she just stared. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quietly, "but we need to go, now." Behind them, the crowd began to disperse. A few men lingered, watching. One of them, a younger man with a thin mustache and a silver badge pinned to his vest, moved closer. "Hold on there, friend. You got papers for her." The rancher turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "Papers. She's an orphan ward, needs to be registered, state law." The rancher's jaw tightened. "I just paid $20 for her freedom. That's all the paper I need." The deputy's hand drifted toward his holster. "That's not how it works." For a long moment, neither man moved. The square fell silent again, the kind of silence that precedes violence. Then the girl spoke. Please. It was barely a word, more breath than sound, but it was enough. The rancher's gaze softened. He looked back at her, at the dirt on her face, the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she stood like she expected the world to collapse on her at any second. He turned back to the deputy. I'll handle the paperwork, but right now she's coming with me. The deputy opened his mouth to argue, but the rancher was already moving. He took the girl's arm, gently, carefully, and guided her down from the platform. She stumbled hurless. GS unsteady, and he caught her, steadying her with one hand. Can you walk? He asked. She nodded. Then walk with me. They crossed the square together, the rancher's stride slow to match hers. Behind them, the deputy called out something about the sheriff, about laws and regulations, but the rancher didn't stop. He didn't look back. At the edge of town, a grey mare stood tied to a post. The rancher untied the reins and turned to the girl. You ever ride? She shook her head. You'll learn. He lifted her onto the saddle, then swung up behind her. She went rigid, her hands gripping the saddle horn. Easy, he said. I'm not going to let you fall. He nudged the mare into a trot, and they left Bitter Creek behind, dust rising in their wake. The girl didn't speak. She didn't ask where they were going, didn't ask his name, didn't ask why he'd done what he did. She just sat in front of him, small and silent, her eyes fixed on the horizon. But as the town disappeared behind them, she whispered again, so quiet he almost didn't hear. They passed me by. The rancher's grip on the reins tightened. His voice, when it came, was soft, haunted. Not anymore. He didn't tell her that he knew why they'd passed her by. He didn't tell her that he'd seen her before, years ago, in another town, on another auction block. He didn't tell her that he'd stood in that crowd, just like the others, and done nothing. He didn't tell her that he'd been carrying that silence for 8 years. The ranch sat in a shallow valley, surrounded by low hills and scrub brush. It wasn't much, a one-room cabin, a barn that leaned slightly to the left, a corral with 3 horses and a handful of cattle grazing in the distance. But it was quiet, peaceful. The rancher dismounted and helped the girl down. She stood beside the mare, her arms wrapped around herself, eyes darting from the cabin to the barn to the empty land beyond. You hungry? He asked. She nodded. Come on, then. Inside the cabin, the air was cooler. A single window let in dusty light. There was a table, 2 chairs, a wood stove, and a narrow cot against the far wall. Everything was clean but worn, used but cared for. The rancher lit the stove and set a pot of water to boil. He pulled out a sack of cornmeal, a tin of lard, some dried venison. He worked in silence, his movements practiced, efficient. The girl sat at the table, her hands folded in her lap. She watched him, but didn't speak. When the food was ready, he set a plate in front of her, cornbread, venison, a cup of water. She stared at it like she didn't believe it was real. Go ahead, he said. She picked up the cornbread with both hands and took a small bite. Then another. Then she ate like she hadn't seen food in days, tearing into the bread, chewing the meat, drinking the water in quick gulps. The rancher sat across from her, his own plate untouched. He watched her eat, and something in his chest tightened. When she finished, she set the cup down and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. She looked at him, wary. What's your name? He asked. She hesitated. Matty. Matty, he repeated. I'm Samuel Greer. She nodded, but didn't respond. He leaned back in his chair. I'm not going to hurt you, Matty. I'm not going to sell you. I'm not going to do anything you don't want. You understand? Her eyes narrowed. Then why'd you buy me? It was the first full sentence she'd spoken. Her voice was stronger than he expected, edged with suspicion. Samuel looked down at his hands. Because I couldn't stand there and do nothing, not again. Again. He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. Then he stood and walked to a small wooden chest in the corner. He opened it, rummaged inside, and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. He brought it back to the table and set it in front of her. "Open it," he said. Mattie unwrapped the cloth slowly. Inside was a small carved wooden horse, no bigger than her palm. It was old, worn smooth by time, but the craftsmanship was clear: delicate legs, a flowing mane, expressive eyes. She stared at it, her fingers tracing the curves. Then her breath caught. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. Samuel's voice was quiet. "You left it behind, 8 years ago, in a town called Red Bluff." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. "How do you?" "I was there." He met her gaze, unflinching. "At the auction, you were 6 years old. Your father had just died, cholera, they said. Your mother was already gone. They put you on that block and I stood in the crowd. I watched them bid on you, watched a man buy you for $15, watched him take you away." Mattie's hands shook. You were there." "I was there," he repeated, "and I did nothing." Her face twisted, anger flashing through the fear. "You just stood there." "I did." "Why?" Samuel's jaw clenched. "Because I was a coward. Because I told myself it wasn't my business. Because I convinced myself someone else would step in." He looked away. "But no one did, and I went home that night and I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't stop seeing your face." Mattie's voice cracked. "You let him take me." "I did." She stopped, her throat tightening. "He was cruel. He worked me till my hands bled. He locked me in the cellar when I spilled water. Her voice broke. She couldn't finish. Samuel's hands balled into fists. "I know, I heard stories. 2 years later, I rode back to Red Bluff, asked around, found out you'd been sold again, and again. I tried to track you, but you kept moving. I lost the trail." "Until today," she whispered. "Until today." He looked at her, his eyes dark with regret. "When I saw you on that platform, I knew. That's why I couldn't walk away. Not this time." Mattie stared at the wooden horse in her hands. Tears streaked down her face, cutting clean lines through the dirt. "You think buying me now makes up for it?" "No," his voice was raw. "Nothing makes up for it, but I couldn't let you be passed by again." She looked up at him, her expression hard. "You want forgiveness." "I don't deserve it." "No," she said, "you don't." The words hung between them, sharp and final. Samuel nodded slowly. "You're right, but you're here now, and as long as you are, you're safe, you're fed, you're free. That's all I can give you." Mattie set the horse down on the table. Her hands were still shaking. "What if I want to leave?" "Then you leave. I won't stop you." She studied his face, searching for the lie, but there was none. "Why should I believe you?" she asked. "Because I've got nothing left to lie about." He stood and walked to the door, opening it to let in the evening air. "You can take the cot. I'll sleep in the barn." "Wait," her voice stopped him. "What if they come looking for me, that deputy?" "Let them come." Samuel's voice was quiet, but there was steel beneath it. "I'll deal with them." He stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Mattie sat alone in the cabin, the wooden horse cradled in her hands. She stared at it for a long time, her tears falling silently. Outside, Samuel leaned against the barn wall, staring up at the stars. He could still see her face from 8 years ago, could still hear the auctioneer's voice, could still feel the weight of his own silence. He closed his eyes. Not again. The riders came 3 days later. Samuel was mending fence near the corral when he heard them, hoofbeats, slow and deliberate, the kind that meant someone wasn't in a hurry, the kind that meant trouble. He set down the hammer and turned. 4 men rode into the yard, their horses kicking up dust. At the front was the deputy from Bitter Creek, his silver badge catching the sunlight. Behind him were 3 others, hired guns by the look of them. Hard faces, holstered revolvers, eyes that had seen too much and cared too little. Samuel walked forward, his hands loose at his sides. "Help you, gentlemen." The deputy reined in his horse and leaned forward, resting his forearm on the saddle horn. "Mr. Greer, is it?" "That's right. I'm Deputy Harlan. We met in town, you remember." "I remember." "Good," Harlan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Then you'll remember I told you about paperwork, state law. You took that girl without proper registration. I paid for her, Samuel said evenly. You paid the auctioneer. That's not the same as filing with the county. She's still a ward of the state, which means she's still property. Samuel's jaw tightened. She's a child. She's an orphan, and the law says orphans get placed through proper channels. You skipped those channels. Then I'll file the paperwork. Harlan shook his head. Too late for that, friend. You took her. That makes you a thief. One of the men behind Harlan chuckled. Stealing state property, that's a hanging offense, ain't it? Samuel's gaze didn't waver. She's not property, and I'm not a thief. Law says different. Harlan straightened in his saddle. So here's how this goes. You hand her over, and we forget this ever happened. You keep her, and we come back with the sheriff. Maybe a rope. Samuel didn't move. She stays. You sure about that? I'm sure. Harlan sighed, shaking his head. Shame, I heard you were a reasonable man. He nodded to the men behind him. Search the cabin. Two of them dismounted and started toward the door. Samuel stepped into their path. You're not going in there. One of them, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, grinned. You gonna stop us, old man? If I have to. The scarred man reached for his gun. And then the door opened. Mattie stepped out barefoot, her hair tied back, her face streaked with dust. She looked at the men, then at Samuel, then back at Harlan. I'm not going, she said. Harlan raised an eyebrow. Girl, you don't have a choice. I do, her voice was steady, and I'm staying. That's not how the law works. The law didn't care about me when I was beaten, when I was starved, when I was sold 3 times before I turned 10. She took a step forward, her hands balled into fists. The law passed me by, just like everyone else. Harlan's expression hardened. You're a child, you don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. She looked at Samuel. He's the only one who didn't pass me by. The scarred man laughed. Touching, real touching. Now get over here before we drag you. Samuel moved in front of her, his voice low. You touch her, and I'll kill you. The laughter died. Harlan's hand moved to his holster. Mr. Greer, you're making a mistake. Wouldn't be my first. For a moment, the yard was silent, except for the wind and the nervous stamping of horses. Then, from the edge of the property, another voice called out. Samuel. Heads turned. An older man rode into the yard on a chestnut gelding. He was gray-haired, lean, with a weathered face and calm eyes. Behind him came 2 more men, ranchers by the look of them, neighbors. The older man reined in beside Samuel. Harlan, didn't expect to see you out this way. Harlan's expression soured. Mr. Brennan, this doesn't concern you. Maybe not. Brennan glanced at Samuel, then at Mattie. But I've known Samuel Greer for 15 years, worked beside him, branded calves with him, helped him bury his wife. He turned back to Harlan. So if you're calling him a thief, you're calling me a liar. One of the other ranchers spoke up. Same here, Samuel's good people. Harlan's jaw clenched. This is a legal matter. Then bring the sheriff, Brennan said calmly. Bring a judge. Bring the whole damn county if you want. But you're not dragging a child off this land without due process. The scarred man shifted, his hand still hovering near his gun. You really want to make this a fight, old man? Brennan smiled, cold and thin. I've been in worse. Harlan looked around, at Brennan, at the 2 ranchers, at Samuel, at Mattie standing defiant in the doorway. He calculated the odds, weighed the risk, and came up short. He pulled his reins, turning his horse. This isn't over, Greer. Figured as much, Samuel said. Harlan spurred his horse, and the 4 men rode off, dust rising in their wake. The yard fell quiet. Brennan dismounted and clapped Samuel on the shoulder. You all right? Samuel nodded. Thanks, Eli. Don't mention it. Brennan glanced at Mattie. She the one from the auction. She is. Brennan studied her for a moment, then nodded. Good, you did right, Samuel. Samuel didn't answer. He just watched the riders disappear over the hill. Matty stepped up beside him. They'll come back. I know. What are we going to do? Samuel looked down at her. For the first time in days, he saw something other than fear in her eyes. He saw trust. We're going to be ready, he said. That night Samuel built a fire outside. The flames crackled, sending sparks into the dark sky. Matty sat on a log across from him, a blanket draped over her shoulders. For a while neither of them spoke. The fire did all the talking, popping, hissing, filling the silence with warmth. Finally Matty broke the quiet. Why'd you keep it? Samuel looked up. Keep what? The horse, the one I carved. He poked at the fire with a stick, watching the embers shift. Reminded me of what I didn't do, thought if I kept it, maybe I'd remember not to be that man again. Did it work? He smiled faintly. Not until I saw you again. Matty pulled the blanket tighter. I don't remember carving it, I just remember being scared all the time. You don't have to be scared here. I've heard that before. Samuel nodded. I know, words don't mean much after a while. No, she agreed, they don't. They sat in silence again. Matty stared into the flames, her face shadowed, her eyes distant. Can I ask you something, she said. Anything. Why didn't you have kids, you and your wife? Samuel's expression flickered, pain, old and buried. We tried, lost 2 before they were born. Doc said she couldn't carry to term, it broke her. Broke me too, I guess. I'm sorry. Me too, he looked at her. She would have liked you. Matty's throat tightened. You don't know that. I do, she had a soft spot for strays, always bringing home injured animals, trying to fix them. He smiled, sad and distant. I used to tell her she couldn't save everything. She'd say, maybe not, but I can save this one. Matty's eyes strung. She looked away, blinking hard. You don't have to save me, she whispered. I'm not trying to save you, Samuel said quietly. I'm just trying not to fail you. She looked at him, tears streaking her face. What if I can't forget what they did to me? Then you don't forget, you carry it, but you don't let it carry you. How? Samuel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. One day at a time, one meal, one sunrise, one choice to keep going. He met her gaze. And maybe, if you're lucky, you find people who help you carry the weight. Maud. T-Tai wiped her eyes. Like you. Like me, like Eli, like anyone who decides you're worth standing beside. She stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she stood and walked around the fire. She sat down beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. I don't trust easy, she said. I know. But, she hesitated, I think I trust you. Samuel's chest tightened. He didn't know what to say. So he just sat there, the fire crackling, the stars overhead, and the girl beside him, silent, wounded, but no longer alone. So here's the question I want to ask you. If you'd been in that crowd 8 years ago, would you have raised your hand? Or would you have walked away, telling yourself it wasn't your burden to carry? Take a deep breath, pour yourself a cup of tea, think about that. And if you're still with me, tap subscribe so you don't miss how this turns out. Tell me in the comments, what time is it where you are right now, and where are you listening from? All right, let's keep going. The next morning, Matty woke to the smell of coffee. She sat up on the cot, rubbing her eyes, and saw Samuel at the stove. Morning, he said. Morning. He poured her a cup and set it on the table. Sleep all right? She nodded. Better than I have in years. He smiled. Good. After breakfast, he took her outside. You want to learn to ride proper. Her eyes widened. Really? Really? He saddled the grey mare and helped Matty up. He showed her how to hold the reins, how to sit, how to signal the horse. She was nervous at first, gripping the saddle horn too tight, but slowly she relaxed. By midday, she was trotting around the corral on her own, grinning. Samuel watched from the fence, his arms crossed, a rare smile on his face. For the first time in 8 years, the weight on his chest felt lighter. The sheriff came 5 days later. This time it wasn't just Harlan. It was Sheriff Cole Braddock himself, a thick-shouldered man with a grey beard and cold eyes. He rode into the yard with 6 men, all armed, all serious. Samuel stepped out of the cabin, Matty behind him. Braddock dismounted slowly. Samuel Greer. "That's me. I'm here about the girl." "Figured." Braddock glanced at Matty, then back at Samuel. "You know this is illegal, right? Taking a ward without filing." "I know." "Then you know I have to bring her in." Samuel's voice was calm. "No, you don't." Braddock's expression hardened. "I'm not asking Greer." "Neither am I." Before Braddock could respond, hoofbeats echoed from the road. More riders. Eli Brennan rode into the yard, followed by a dozen men, ranchers, farmhands, townspeople. Men Samuel had worked with, lived beside, helped over the years. Brennan dismounted and stood beside Samuel. "Sheriff." Braddock's jaw tightened. "Eli, what's this?" "This," Brennan said, "is us telling you that Samuel Greer is one of ours, and if you take that girl, you're taking her from all of us." One of the ranchers spoke up. "Samuel helped me pull my cattle out of a flood 2 winters ago, didn't ask for a thing." Another added, "He lent me seed when my crop failed, didn't expect it back." A woman stepped forward, Mrs. Calloway, who ran the general store. "That girl's been through hell, Sheriff. You really want to send her back into it." Braddock looked around at the faces surrounding him, men and women he'd known for years, people who didn't make trouble, who followed the law. "But not today." He turned back to Samuel. "You're putting me in a hell of a position, Greer." "I know, but I can't let her go." Braddock studied him for a long moment, then he looked at Matty. "Girl, you want to stay here?" Matty stepped forward, her voice clear. "I do." "He treating you right. Better than anyone ever has." Braddock sighed, rubbing his face. "Damn it." He looked at Harlan. "This your idea, pushing this hard?" Harlan shifted uncomfortably. "I was just following." "Shut up." Braddock turned back to Samuel. "File the paperwork, proper this time. Adoption, guardianship, whatever it takes, I'll sign off on it. But if I hear one word, one single word, that you're mistreating her, I'll come back myself. Understood?" Samuel nodded. "Understood." Braddock mounted his horse. "Come on, boys, we're done here." Harlan started to protest, but Braddock shot him a look that silenced him. The men turned their horses and rode off. The crowd erupted in quiet cheers. Eli clapped Samuel on the back. "You did it." Samuel shook his head. "We did it." Brennan grinned. "Same thing." As the neighbors dispersed, Matty stood in the yard watching them go. Samuel walked up beside her. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. "Yeah, I think I am." Weeks passed. Samuel filed the paperwork. It took time, meetings with the county clerk, letters to the state, affidavits from neighbors, but eventually the documents came through. Matty Rose Greer, adopted daughter. She cried when she saw the papers, not out of sadness, but something else, something that felt like relief, like belonging. Samuel built her a proper bed. Eli's wife brought over clothes. Mrs. Calloway donated books. Slowly, the cabin began to feel like a home. Matty learned to ride, to mend fences, to cook, to read. She still had nightmares sometimes, woke up gasping, reaching for something that wasn't there. But Samuel was always nearby, his voice calm, steady. "You're safe, Matty, you're home." And slowly, she began to believe it. 1 year later, Matty stood in the corral, brushing down the gray mare. The sun was setting, painting the valley in gold and amber. She heard footsteps and turned. Samuel approached, carrying something wrapped in cloth. "Got something for you." She set down the brush. "What is it?" He handed it to her. She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a carved wooden horse, new, larger than the first, beautifully detailed. Beside it was the old one, small and worn. Thought you should have both, Samuel said, the one you were and the one you are now. Mattie's eyes filled with tears. She looked up at him. Thank you. He smiled. You don't have to thank me, Mattie. You're my daughter. She threw her arms around him, holding tight. Samuel held her back, his eyes closing. Not again, he thought, never again. Years later, people in Bitter Creek would talk about the girl who'd been passed by on the auction block and the man who'd refused to let her fall through the cracks. They'd talk about how she grew into a strong, capable woman, how she took over the ranch when Samuel got older, how she never forgot where she came from but never let it define where she was going. And they'd talk about Samuel Greer, the man who'd carried his silence for 8 years, until the day he finally found the courage to speak. The wooden horses sat on the mantel in the cabin, side by side, a reminder. Some people pass you by, but some people raise their hand and say, mine. And that makes all the difference.